Good evening. Seems to be on and off. I'm not sure how it's going to work tonight. First thing I'd like to do is introduce the upcoming programs for the rest of the spring here real quick, if you have your calendars. The first one is February 28th. That's our next regular meeting that is here at the church. And that one is the history of Holt, Best, and Early Caterpillar, which is their history through 1941. I think it should be really interesting. This is Nicole Thaxton, and she is the historian from Caterpillar, and she's coming to do the program. I've heard really great things about the program. So, March 28th is our next program. I wonder if it's the battery. Historical Moments in Time with Photo Restoration. This is Becky Daly. She is from Metamora, Illinois, and has done some restoration of historical photographs. She'll be here to answer questions, talk a little bit about what she does and how that works. And then also, April 25th is our annual banquet. That will be at the Methodist Church. And that is the architectural history of the Washington Square. That is Bill DeBuff's grandson, Zach Borders, coming to do that program. He's coming from Chicago to join us, and I think it promises to be a really interesting program. So anyway, without further ado, I'll go ahead. I'd like to have everyone, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to go back through the panel and let them tell us their story, if you will. So kind of whatever they'd like to tell you about their family, their history, their background in an introduction format. We are also going to have Bob doing some movies, and I think what I'd like to do is maybe start with the movie, which is short, and then we're going to let him kind of reset and reorganize while we go through the rest of the group. So Bob, you're on. Here you go. I'm going to let you try to use that mic. I don't know.
Well, I've never seen this, and this is
This is Lois Sampson's dad.
See, that's
At
why
the fall
I'm
festival. They used to have, and they're showing curtains off the rope around the square. You might see some familiar faces.
Bob, can you sit down?
Oh, I'm sorry.
there he is.
They said they're throwing turkeys. I'm not sure what the story is. We don't throw turkeys anymore, but... Let's go.
There you are, Lois.
Well, there you
Can they take that 32 millimeter and put it on VCR?
somebody else that always get up.
You know.
I didn't even know it occurred.
Some of those faces in there are long gone. I don't know if you recognize any of them or not. But the last Santa Claus was, the guy down at Pontiac Garage in the corner. Martin Meyer. He was the Santa Claus. So my brother was an amateur photographer years ago. He started out when it was black and white film. And I've got a box this big of film. And some of them are personal ones. But the other one I have there starts out with my dad in the backyard. This is really interesting, skinning rabbits. Then it shows some guys that somebody here used to ride with my brother to Caterpillar. And it shows the guys unloading the Caterpillar plus the American Legion used to have a crap shootout at Old Forks up west of town. It shows some of the old timers out there shooting traps. That's about it, actually. Other than Lois's dad he's used the turkeys.
Would you like to start? Tell us your name, what your Washington history is, give us some good scoop.
Well, my name's Dick Van Syke, as you can see here at this nameplate. Apologize for the way I'm dressed this evening. I've had a rough day. I've been in jury duty all day. Any of you that's gone to jury duty knows what that can entail. Got to go back tomorrow morning. Got a big case that I'm on over there, so I didn't get off today. I talked my wife into coming with me. I said, come on, I said, I'm sure there may be 10 people. You're going to make 11. I was brutally awakened when I walked in the door, and then I see my favorite niece and her husband, Bill and Norma Jean Brado, here, in which on the way in, Karen said, we ought to stop and say hi to Norma Jean and Bill. I said, we'll have time. All we do is say hi and run, so I said, we'll stop there at another time. Looking at the movie that I just watched here brought back a lot of memories I'd forgotten all about. But I've watched them throw those turkeys, and chickens, and animals off the courthouse, and I've caught a couple of them. And then they did the same thing here in Washington, and I'd completely forgotten about those days. But every Thanksgiving, they had maybe 50 turkeys, you name it, they threw them off the top of the courthouse or off the highest building in town. And then there was a mad scramble, and some of those turkeys and chickens were in pieces when I got a leg, and you got a neck, and you got a wing. That's the way some of them ended up. When I was in high school, I grew up in Eureka. Believe it or not, I made many trips to Washington. Washington used to have a skating rink on the east edge of town, and Eureka didn't have one. The other thing that Washington had that Eureka didn't have was a pool hall right downtown. And as high school kids, we used to catch a ride those days. We didn't have cars or anything. Today, all the kids have got automobiles. We used to catch a ride over and play pool, get involved with some of the Washington guys. Some other nights we'd come in and go to the skating rink. And I remember those days a long time ago. And when I was asked to come over here, I was kidding Karen. I said, they must be looking for someone 80 years older, They're trying to remember some stories. And at my age, I got Alzheimer's now, and when you get Alzheimer's, you forget everything. I'm a poor one to be trying to recollect some stories. But when I landed in Washington, I was coaching in Arlington, and I applied for the Washington job. And lo and behold, I got the job, but I didn't really realize that it was going to cost me $750 cut in pay to come to Washington. And that was a big paying job back in those days. I think it was around $3,600 a year. I had to work at nights at Libby's and catch every little odd job I could catch to make ends meet. And then we had two kids, Gwen and Janny, and some of you have talked to me about saying hi to Gwen and Janny when I go home. But if it hadn't been for Norma Jean's mother, Clara, my sister-in-law, babysitting, we wouldn't have been able to do some of the things we did because she was there when we needed her at all times. And I'll always be grateful for that. I could rattle on here, but I'm not going to take anybody. I see Tom, he's all dressed up. He made me feel bad when I saw him. I want to pass this on, and I appreciate you inviting me over here because I get to reminisce with some friends. I just want to say, I don't know if I mentioned Butch Carey back there, and I know his wife's got some pictures here. And my wife and I, we buy a lot of pizza at the grocery store. And every time we went there, I said, these are Butch's pizzas. And I said, Butch is an old manual grad, so we gotta buy his pizzas. Butch, raise your hand so everybody can see. There's the pizza man sitting back there. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Tish Putnam Warren. I don't know if many of you know me, but I've lived here almost all of my life. In fact, all of my life. Tish. Yeah. We went to school together, and he was a teacher, and I was a student. I lived on both sides of town. I grew up on Avon Circle, which is off of Hilldale. And I used to be able to ride my bike all the way down to what used to be Russell's Cycle Shop, and that was as far as I could go. But times have changed now, of course. You watch your children more carefully, but we sort of had the run of town. And I remember going home from Lincoln School, and there was a back way we could walk, and my mom said, now whatever you do, don't walk on our high picket fence. Well, that's exactly what I did. I was in ballet, so I sort of tiptoed around the whole backyard on this high picket fence. It's a wonder I'm still alive today. But we just had a lot of fun. And when I was in 8th grade, we built our home, which I presently live in, which is on South Main. And it was right next to my grandmother's house. And I have a lot of good memories about going to Graham's for pancakes in the morning. And we just had a great life. And I think the one thing that stands out as I look back over memories would be one year we went to the Sweet 16 tournament and we won it. And I was a cheerleader all 4 years, and so we rode back with the ball players. And I'll never forget the sight of everyone in town, it seemed like, was out on the square. Everywhere. There were bands going and everything just to support Washington teams, and I was just so impressed I couldn't believe it. And then also the many times we had band concerts, and the concert had a platform, and the band played right in the middle of the square, and all of us would run around and have popcorn, and that was a grand time. And people were sitting in blankets all along in front of the stores. I was busy, especially with swimming. I taught swimming. I was one of the first swimming teachers at what I call Neptune Swim Club. It's now Washington Park District or something. But when it first started, when we didn't even have a swimming pool, I was one of the instructors that went down on the bus all the way to Lake Bloomington and taught swimming. And then they built the swimming pool, and Al Wilson and Monty Kimmel and golly, Ken Heck, a whole lot of people would be the first swimming teachers. And I basically lived there. Right after breakfast, I'd go out and have individual swimming lessons, and then we'd have adult swimming lessons, and it just went on and on all day. The most difficult was teaching my mom and some of her friends how to swim. They didn't really want to learn, they were just there to have fun. But anyway, I now am proud owner of Happy Days Preschool, and also have 2 sons. One is out of school and working in Peoria, and the other is in Chicago finishing his last year of school. So that's it.
Hi, I'm Kevin Teavey, and was kind of curious how I got to be here. When Stephanie called, I saw her name on my desk at Russell's, and I thought my sister put her up to getting a good deal on a treadmill or something. She explained what it was. I was looking back to figured out that earlier in this last spring, going to one of the meetings, and we were discussing a lady called Mary Burkett, and Mary Burkett, I believe, lives in my house part of the time, but not all the time, after having talked to a couple of neighbors. But I'm kind of a 4th generation, I'd like to say 4th generation Washington resident. My great-grandparents lived out on County Line Road, township of Worth, but they always came to Washington to do their business. Grandparents, when they got married, they moved onto the Burkett farm out on Booth Road, and that's where they lived until they could get enough money to buy a farm. Well, our farm is at the end of Elm Street here. A nice place for me to grow up. Walk out the back door and you're out in the country. Walk out the front door and you're in town. But one of the things how I believe Mary got to our house is, I always say that the house that I live in is over 100 years old, because my father purchased a corner of the farm from my grandparents and went out and tore down the Burkett house and used the lumber to build our house with. So I kind of feel as though that's the way Mary had moved into the neighborhood. And having helped with clear some brush with the neighbors, we found out that not only did she live in my house, but also with the Roses next door, and also with the Essex. And when Mrs. Essex was saying we have a ghost, but I don't know who she is, her name begins with M, I always remember my daughter's always playing with Mary down in the basement, so I always kind of made that correlation there. Growing up on the farm, though, kind of getting sidetracked here, I kind of want to talk about the Thieme farm. As far as I know, it was built by a man named Garber, I believe in the late 1800s, and the barn was actually built as a livestock sell barn here in Washington. And the house was an apartment house where the upstairs and the downstairs was completely the exact same. And from Garber, it got sold to Doc Sullivan. And Doc Sullivan always ran his auction every week. And my aunt would make crescent rolls and sell out of the garage, and my dad would help with the livestock around the farm. And my grandfather approached him when Mr. Sullivan decided to sell out, Dr. Sullivan, and grandfather bought the place, and it was set up perfect to raise hogs. And he filled the whole farm with hogs, and in the second year they got cholera, and all the hogs died. So then he went into the milking business, and one of the people that I talked to here in town always loved the Gimme cream. Always said it was the sweetest in town. And it wasn't until a couple of years back that I figured out why. Grandfather only fed his brown Swiss sweet clover and red clover. Didn't feed him alfalfa, so he always had the sweetest cream in town. And Grandma always sold eggs, and I wanted to also say that Lindy's, they sure do support the local farmers. I was really happy when they started selling Zerabes. They always used to sell Theme eggs, back when they were on the southwest corner of the square. And I can remember going up with Grandma and taking the eggs and filling up their boxes. And so I want to give Lindy's a plug. They are a supporter of the Washington area. It was always fun growing up on the farm, and never had any dull moments throughout growing up, having raised chickens and hogs and rabbits and just about anything that a farm could or would have on the farm. And I can't think of anything else to say about it, but I would spend more time researching the auction house. I don't know if anybody knew that before now or not, but the barn still has the doorways where all the hogs, and even though Grandpa did put hay mow on it, you can still see how it used to be set up as an auction barn. I'm going to pass it off.
Until I get up.
You don't have to stand. You don't have to stand.
That shows I'm a little older than you. Well, the first thought I have when I received Debbie's letter was, my, they must be hard up for a program. But thank you, it is a joy to be here and see so many people that I haven't seen for a long time. I grew up in Cooper Station. That's where I was born and raised till I was in high school. All of you know where Cooper Station is? Well, I was going to tell you, it had an elevator, I'll tell you anyway. It had an elevator that my father ran, and at that time it had a depot and a schoolhouse and our house. And our house is still there. It's the greenhouse as you go by the elevator and so forth. And I didn't want to go out and see it, and someone says, oh, no, you don't, so I didn't go. But I had to quit high school when I was a junior, and I went to work at the A&P store. And I worked there for about 4 years. Maybe many of you remember me waiting on you. And from there, then I married a man from Eureka, and I worked at Eureka at the A&P store for several years. I have a brother that had a restaurant and a tavern, Marshall's Tavern, over, so I see someone shaking their head. So he has passed away by now. And I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and my sister lives here in town, and I are the only ones left. But I want to tell you a little bit about Cooper Station. they would throw ice off. The train would go by and throw ice off to my mother. And then she would make homemade ice cream and bake cherry pie, and the whole train would stop the next day. And all of them would get out, and they'd have ice cream. I was wondering what I was going to tell you, that I wonder what would happen now if the train had stopped. That was something really that I remember real well. I just don't know where to start otherwise. I've had a wonderful life here in Washington. I had 2 children. My daughter has passed away, and my son Gene lives in Oklahoma. He was the director of bands at the university there for about 30 years, and he's here visiting me tonight. And if I'd have known that he was, so many were here, like Dick Van Zyhawk, I'd have had him come with me, because he would really enjoy it. Right now, as you can tell by looking at me, I'm retired, and I don't do much but sit in my chair, except I do have a senior citizen dinner once a month for the senior citizens at the United Methodist Church. So that kind of keeps me thinking, what will I have? And kind of nice to have one thing that you have to think of. I think that's all I can think of. After a while, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them if I can. Thank you.
My name is Lois Sampson. That was my father up on those throwing turkeys on. And he did a lot more than that too, believe me. I brought a lot of things for show and tell here that I will put out and people can look at. We lived the first house south of the square. And South Main Street for about a block was all relatives. And so Uncle Perry Burkett lived across the street. And you ever remember Ethel Cooper? She was a cousin of my dad's. And so we're related to many, many people here in town. The one I thought maybe hadn't been mentioned is Heil Pony Farm. The Heil Pony Farm, Washington was quite famous for that over the years. We were known worldwide because of Heil Pony Farm. They had their own cars, railroad cars, to ship their ponies. They shipped them to France. They shipped them to New York. They shipped them out to California. Just, not this last Olympics, but the one before that. I can't tell you exactly which one it is. The Heil Pony Farm still exists, not here in Washington, but there's a relative out in California. And she's a fairly young lady, and she shipped 4 ponies over to, I want to say Switzerland, that's not right.
Tokyo.
The east. Where?
Tokyo.
No. The island, the big island. I can't say it. Australia, thank you. She shipped them over there when it was over in Australia. She had a coach made. It was like an 1860 or 70 coach of that era that took people across the United States then. The size of the ponies. And she shipped 4 ponies to Australia plus the coach by air. They came in the stadium, drove around the stadium, and drove out, and that's all you ever saw. Oh boy, that was a lot for that few minutes that we all saw them. But that was the Heil Pony Farm. She's still a part of the family. And they started here. And there's another thing I brought. I brought some stuff to see. I thought would help. Other than that, I don't know too much. I lived in the first house out in Maine. My grandmother and grandfather bought that house in about 1915. And I lived there when we came down. I was born and raised in Chicago, so I didn't know anything about this town particularly other than through my dad. And I went to school here from 8th grade on. And I think the one thing I want to tell you that nobody's mentioned, flunk day. Remember flunk day? Well, I was the last class to go through the Washington schools that had a flunk day. They changed the law. And the law now said we had to go to school so many days a year. And we didn't want to add one day, so they'd had to pay the teachers evidently, which is good. But anyway, we all got expelled. The whole school got expelled, except the Norris kids. And they stayed in school because their father practically said, "You're dead if you don't go to school." So they were the only ones that stayed in school, and the rest of us all were expelled. And we all had to take our parents back, and they had to sign a release, or whatever you want to call it, that we would never do it again. And so that was the last flunk day. And you remember when we had homecoming and we danced from the school clear up to the square, through all the trees, and back and forth across the highway. Of course, there wasn't any cars in the highway back then. But that's what we would do, is dance clear up to the square. And somebody was talking about Holland's Mercantile. Well, I went to school with Dorothy Mae Holland. And she had the popcorn machine outside her dad's barber shop. And he wouldn't let anybody go in but Dorothy Mae, because he had a pool table in the back room of the barber shop, and there were no ladies in that pool room. So we had more fun on band concert days, because we'd all hang around and sell popcorn with Dorothy Mae, and then we'd walk around the square, and that was the big day. Usually had a nickel, spend. So that was my introduction to Washington, you might say. I did graduate from high school here, so I made it. Well, I guess that's the end of me.
Well, I don't really know where to start, but I guess I want to start here by recognizing some faces. Mel White and Dick Van Saag, Tish, Bernice, Carol, Wilma. These are all people I grew up with, Norman, Bill. You kind of like my outfit. It's much better than when I graduated from high school. The other part of it is I think Dick could probably tell more stories, but I'm glad he doesn't. I think I have a distinction of trying to tell my father one time how I failed physical education in high school. And he couldn't quite seem to understand that. But, somewhere along the line, I was being taught a lesson that I could skip like the rest of the people. And I could take showers like the rest of the people. And I've got to say that Coach Van Saag was very instrumental in my life. He kind of set my nose straight in a direction. But before I had the privilege of being with Mr. Van Saag in high school, I was fascinated by a young lady in grade school who was a terrific softball pitcher. And one of the first girls that I ever knew of that was on a grade school softball team. And that was Norma Brady. And I was not a very good softball player. I couldn't catch a ball. I put my hands up and the ball hit me in the face. I decided I was going to be a catcher because they wore a mask and a pad. And by the way, I could see Norma pitch. And Tish, she used to live over on Elm Street?
Yes.
Right. right next to Dolly and Hoop Alexander. And I came home one day and complained to my mother and father that Tish and her sister had white sand in their sandbox. And I couldn't quite figure out why I had to have brown sand in mine. But anyway, they had white sand in their sandbox. And here a few years ago, I got the distinct pleasure of having one of her sons come down and work in my department. And what a nice young man. And yes, I let him know about the white sand. Bernice and Paul, my goodness, at Paul's Market, heavenly days. My wife and I, we had about 4 children at the time, and I was working about 3 jobs. I was on the fire department and working about 3 jobs. I worked at Dick Scott's Hardware in the daytime and worked at the television station at night. Tried to paint, sign, and draw house plans in the meantime. And my oldest daughter, about 2 years old, had the habit of kind of wandering off away from my wife, and my wife was busy with 3 other children. And my daughter wandered off up to Paul's Market in the nude. And anyway, Bernice brought Karina, my daughter, home with no clothes on. And I think the second time it happened, she's up there, and Mrs. Witt, who lived right next door to me, brought my daughter home. Many years later, I visited Paul and Bernice in Florida, and Paul brought out a little box, and it was a streaker's kit. The gym shoes, the mask, the whole bit, and he said, "Give this to your daughter." So anyway, I think my daughter was one of the first streakers, and it happened right in Washington Square. I also worked for J.J. Ream, carried in coal, carried out ashes. He was an interesting man. I never got any shoes out of him. I got lots of dimes. And but it was really interesting in the shoe store. I also worked in Marshall's as a youngster, and I noticed that Kit Zinser used my story about the Fall Festival, and my job at Marshall's was put the weenies on a stick for the pup to attend. So that was my big role in the Fall Festival. I was a weenie sticker. I used that on my resumes years later. It really gets the boss's attention when you let them know that. I think the other place that I worked for Ray Heupel, and I delivered, what were they, gold bond stamps, I think they had at one time in town, and my job was to deliver these stamps. And I was also a paper boy for the Peoria Journal-Star. We used to pick up our papers at the post office, which is about where Parishes is now, and we'd fold them and go out. And my route was out in the northwest corner of Washington. I think I had 38 customers during the week and 43 on Sunday. Some people I never saw. I just left the paper. And all of the money I made, I spent at Mickey's Lunch or Johnny Leonard's. And so they got everything that I got. One other place that I was employed on the square in Washington was my mother and father were kind of very active people. And they spent some time at Marshall's. And being a youngster, there wasn't much for me to do but to sit out on the curb. And they sent me to the theater. I'd go to the theater there. Webb Roque was the manager at the time. And I always wanted to be the projectionist, just like Dave Riley and Waldo Thulis. They were top notch. They ran the projector up in the little place. But I'd go to the movies all the time, 2 or 3 times a week, and I fell asleep. And as the ushers would come down, I'd slide down in the seat, and they wouldn't see me, and they'd lock the place up. And I'd wake up, and nobody's there. I'd come out, and the place all locked up, and they had the thumb bolts. And to let yourself out, but naturally I didn't have a key to lock it back up. But Webb Rokie was very, very concerned about his employees leaving the theater doors unlocked. And at the usual 6:30 Marshall's coffee clutch that Kaki Schleininger, Earl Zimmerman, my father, and several other coffee drinkers would attend every morning, they got to talking, and Webb Rokie had mentioned about his theater being unlocked. And it suddenly dawned on my dad that Tommy come home kind of late one night and said he fell asleep in the theater. And so they finally figured out it was me leaving the door unlocked after the theater was closed. Webb Rokie gave a key to my dad and said, "Here, give him a key. He'll go to sleep again. There's one catch. He's got to stop in after school and sweep up the popcorn boxes." And that was one of my jobs there on Washington Square. I think the other folks that I can fondly remember in Washington, I was only in Washington about 27 years, and that's been a few years ago. But my goodness, my neighborhood from 206 East Jefferson, Mrs. Heibel, Esther and Sadie Guth, Viola Reeser, Mrs. Putman, Dolly, wow, were they good cooks. And I knew what day they baked what. And that's when I was usually on their back porch for Dolly Alexander's banana pie, or I'd slip up to Marshall's sometimes and get Mom Marshall's Dutch apple pie. And I understand that was a secret recipe that, does anybody know what that was yet? But that was kind of my route as a vagabond kid in and around Washington Square. I thank you for having me tonight. It's such a treat. And I don't know if you all have noticed that Walter Lott's brother with his website with the www.wacohigh.com. Look at it, it's fantastic. That young man is doing a fantastic job with pictures and stories of Washington, Illinois. And it's really kind of nice. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Imhoff, and how I'm related to Washington is, my mother is Rosalind Gott Martini. Rosalind Martini Gott, my grandmother is Caroline Martini, and she was married to another longtime Washingtonian, August Martini, and both sides you can kind of go through the line. So we've been here for a long time. I was born and raised in Peoria, but I always kind of considered Washington my second home. I got the gist of small town living through Washington. We were over here a lot. Holidays, we'd just come over to visit my grandmother, my granddad too, when he was still alive. Lots of memories, just not only my own, but the memories through my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother loved to talk about, all her friends and all the old days, and I know some of you from that. And all the names, not all, but a lot of the names that I hear, I've heard before, even though I don't know them, just from hearing them talk. Like Coach down there,
Tell you what,
I will. She had some fond memories of high school, and I know my grandmother did too. I don't know, just kind of where to start. We would come over here, and what I would love to do is go to the house, which, by the way, is fabulous. The Historical Society has done a beautiful job, and I know that she would just love it. But she would tell us all the things that went on in the house, her memories of her father being the town doctor, and she would go with him on his house calls in the flu of 1918, how horrible that was, and a gentleman here in town who lost like 6 of his 8 children. Very touching stories. And, well, these things I had in my head are just kind of flying out the window. But a tradition that we had that still kind of carries on today is Washington's Memorial Day Parade. Back when I was a child, well, I was actually born on the official Memorial Day, May 30th, before the Monday holidays took over. And so back when I was young, I got the choice of if I could have a party or if I wanted to come over to Washington for the parade. Well, I was very young and I thought, well, the parade sounded good, so I chose that, and we've been coming back every year ever since. Back then, we'd decorate our bikes and haul them over here and ride with the parade, and it's something that we bring back my daughter now too, and she's 10. She decorates her bike and we ride the parade. I ride with her. My husband walks. Oh, he's another connection to Washington. He grew up over in Woodford County, but his father was Peter Imhoff from Washington. I'm sorry, I didn't say father, I meant uncle. Uncle was Peter Imhoff. Peter's father, Peter's brother is his dad. So anyway, that's another, I married a, it's a connection somehow. But that was Woodford County, it's not Tazewell County. Well, you have a story? Oh, okay.
She's talking about the parade. Who was the man that rode the horse at the front of the parade on Memorial Day? He was a major in World War I.
Fred Schweitzer.
Yeah, Fred Schweitzer. He comes down South Main Street, and after Fred came the flag bearers. We had company, this was back in the 40s, I'd say, from New York City. And so they were staying for the weekend, and they were just intrigued with this little town that we lived in. So this was a holiday, and they got up, and he put on a pair of shark skin shorts. And the men in Washington didn't wear shorts. And he didn't know anything about it, and they were sitting in the backyard having breakfast. And we heard the parade coming and the band, and I ran out front, and he came with me. And Fred Schweitzer literally fell off. I'll never forget that. He thought he was in his underwear.
To add to that.
I just had to tell that when you said parade.
That's a good one. And it's really great that the Washington Band comes out every year. We're always really impressed that every year, you know, it's a holiday, it's a Monday morning, and they get up and they're out there. They're great. Well, that's about it for the moment. Pass it down. And Tish, it occurred to me a little while ago that we just want
I'm going to go ahead and count. Go to film, and then we'll take some questions.
I'm glad to see you here because I've volunteered at Proctor for 17 years. And I had the pleasure of knowing your mom and also Jackie.
Right. She told me that.
She said you were going to be.
Yeah, she told me you were going to be.
Where is your mother?
I told her she couldn't
Yeah,
come. Sorry.
I'll talk to you later about you. I'll run this and then I've got a couple of comments.
Okay.
As I said, amateur photography. I don't know what that is. This is my dad out in the backyard of our place up on South School Street, 2 blocks south of the old school. Some of this is just personal stuff. There's my $10 bicycle that was stolen and got stolen.
Hey, Bob, sit down. Sit down.
Oh, I'm sorry. There, who knows how that is? Minnie Heddy. She used to run a restaurant in town now. My brother was a waiter there. This is out at the Forks. The American Legion had a trap shoot. Some of you might know some of those old guys. Isn't that exciting? Cobble, he used to live across the street from us. That's Morris's house in the background. That's my dad and I in the back. That was one of our staples. He was a metro hunter. We had a lot of rabbits. And those Santa Fe tracks a long ago. That's back in the late 30s. That's a Caterpillar employee. From Redmond, Maine. Oh, that's a no. I built my residence. That's Norris's house and Dad. Oh, yeah. Never was very successful. That's a dining room scene in the family. It's not very good. Not very well done. Lindbergh and I have been That's a Zitzer lineage she's part of. Jackie, you can have it. Little one. I have scribbled a few notes I hope I can read. Our family, the Hobbins, and my mother's family, Sensenbos, came here probably in the 1800s. So we are old residents. And my grandfather, Sensenball, in Germany, is Zanzibar. They all came over here in the 1800s. But my grandpa, Sensenball, worked for Danforth at Stock Farm. Mr. Danforth sent him to Chicago for the 1893 World's Fair because electricity was just coming in. He and the crew put up the poles and the wires to wire the city of Washington. So that was factory. My dad, some of you might know, maybe they don't, but he was a painter, interior decorator. He painted all the big homes in town. He painted this church, and he painted this steeple. And he had an old step ladder. He couldn't reach the top steeple.
Yeah, that was
So
all
he
we
put the
had.
step ladder up, painted it, went down, put the ladder against the building, and stood on it. All the steps went out. So if he'd have done that up there, he wouldn't have put up the leaf. Some of the things they talk about here we did with kids. My dad, self-taught musician, he played in 2 bands that traveled the country in the 20th century by train. So my sister was here. We're just only 2 left. Betty, I had a brother Wilbur, he died. My sister Mary died. And my sister's here with me tonight. But our big fun was the band concerts also. And we had a whole Nicholas band, right?
Yeah,
And we'd go to Slips and I's Tavern on the south side and get a sack of fish, or we'd go over to Roy Risser over on this side of the square, and he beat Dairy Queen. He had Frosty Malts for pickle. Remember those? That was a big thing. And the popcorn, of course. Betty Gerber, you're here for Betty and my wife, when we first got married, Betty and my wife worked for good old Ray Heifel, the bank. They were the bankers of Washington. And we lived upstairs. This is not all covered exactly, but my wife put a sign in the bathroom over the safe, assets over $1 million. Heifel had that much money, but the bank before that, when I was a kid, we broke during the Depression. And all my life savings went down to 2 because the bank went broke. so I didn't have any spare money at all. So nickel in those days was really good. I could go on and on and on, but I have 2 sons, and they each have a boy and a girl, so I have some grandchildren. They don't live around here. But the big event was the fall festival. One of them, I remember one of them, my brother-in-law came over from Peoria, back when Studebaker, remember one year they gave away a little Studebaker? So my brother-in-law bought a ticket for his girlfriend. Guess who won the car? He never saw her or the car again. One of those little tiny, what were they called?
Is this small, or is this small?
Pardon?
This small? Is he alive?
I don't really know. He was in our class.
He died. Oh, he used to work in the Studebaker garage.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Dale, well, Diz.
Tisdale. That was his real name. Yeah, Dale, Diz and I were in the class. We graduated in 1939, which is the old school on the east side. And we lived 2 blocks south of that on Spruce Street, where the Santa Fe track used to be. I won't go on any longer, but this one, I was hoping Kit Zinsser would be here because I really get a kick out of reading this. She is really, really good, I think, the way she puts this together. And this is another Zinsser who's, Anyway, one where Betty Gerber was interviewed for this story on there. It was a good story. There's a lot of things in there that I remember that going back, like cow dung and football field. And I don't know if any of, probably none of you here were around at the time, but they introduced night softball by Sullivan's Field. Well, I misbehaved one time. Jack Norris and Kimpling and I did something I won't tell you about. And I got grounded, and I could see no more ball games. Man, that was terrible. There wasn't anything else to do. The theater in town, I think somebody referred to, my dad was chosen to decorate that, so he did all the decorating in that wonderful theater they had here at that time. We're next door to the wonderful Marshall's Tavern, across the alley from Boomeyer's Grocery. Right? I think I'll quit. Thank you.
Bob, here, I thought maybe it'd be fun if you tell us about a favorite teacher or somebody that you remember at school. Bob, you can go first.
Forget that.
Who remembers Miss Mary Evelyn?
Miss Mary.
Anybody?
She's always a favorite.
Every year I did go to school to her. The first grade in those days was at the other end of town where the barber shop was, or is, I don't know. So it was a big deal for us to walk from the east end of town to go to first grade. And she was a teacher for my dad, my mother, and all 4 in our family. There's only one like her. That's teacher.
My dad went to Mary Island, and my mother and myself. And I run across the book that Mary Island gave to my dad.
Really?
Whatever happened to that flower memorial thing that was in the square, remember that? They had a big presentation.
I can't remember.
He's asking about a flower memorial that was in
Flower urn.
an urn. Where was it located,
It
Bob?
was in the square, the southwest corner.
Southwest corner of the square. Does anybody know anything about that? I'm sorry, the mic's not very open. How about, Tom, do you have anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I guess if I didn't say Mr. Van Syak over here was one of my favorite teachers, I would be in big time trouble. I've got to say this, and a few years ago I went back to the high school and I pulled out my records to look at them, and I did it in privacy, of course. And I was totally amazed the number of days I was absent. And I think I racked up about 39 days in a semester for 4 years, every 4 years. So when you talk about good teachers, they really had a short period of time to work on me. And I just want to say one thing. Mr. Abernathy kind of caught me in the hallway before I graduated, or as he referred to it, he says, "We're not really graduating you, Tom, we're releasing you."
I was thinking of Mary Jenkins.
Yes.
She's still alive.
Yes.
Up in Eureka, in the nursing home there. I had her in school, and I'm 82 years old.
She's wonderful.
Yeah.
I got a card from her.
Sharp as a tack. That I can't.
PE director, PE teacher.
Yeah, supposedly. Yeah, that's the one that's still living.
This is pick on Dick night.
Oh.
Some nights I couldn't imagine why Gene didn't get home from school. And he said, well, you had to make 70-some free throws before you could leave.
This is Big on Dick night, and I want to know why he hasn't had me back over to check his treadmill.
It's still working fine. Tell Gene that I really wish he'd have been here tonight.
Well, I wish I'd have let brought him.
When you talk about ex-students and players, I got to tell a story on Gene. He was a drummer, very good musician, real tops. He came into high school, but he wasn't a very good jumper, and he wasn't very quick, and he wasn't very strong. And I had him jumping weights, and he despised the weights. And I had to go to a clinic over in Indiana, and I listened to Bucky O'Connor, who was the coach at University of Iowa. And he brought along a couple of doctors who were doing some testing on increasing the Iowa squad's jumping ability. And of course, I heard that, and I come home, and I was going to try anything that's going to help our kids jump and get faster, and bigger, and stronger. So I initiated the same program, only with maybe 15 or 20 pounds less weight than what the university kids were jumping. And I had them jumping, I know, with a 75-pound weight on their neck, or maybe we start out for a minute, but we'll get up to 5. And if any of you go see this movie right now by the coach, it's great. It's good for anybody. And you can visualize all this workouts and things, and I wasn't anything like Mr. Coach, Mr. Carter. But we did do this, and I know that Gene, we kept a record of everybody, and what convinced me to continue this all through Washington and Manual, and every year that I coached, we used this weight program. Gene jumped and increased his jumping ability from 2 inches or 1.5 inches, which was barely off the floor, to 6 inches. And I'll never forget Gene for that reason, because he was the reason I really fell for the weight program.
By the way, my mother was the first cheerleader Washington had, and this was, of course, years ago. But I have a story real quickly about thrill kills. Mom used to call up, and I wish we had this service today. She'd say, now I want a small box of ivory, and she'd give all the brands and everything, and they would deliver. And I wish we had that today, because it was sure nice personalized service.
When Coach Van Sack talks about the jumping progress, here a few years ago we had our 40th class reunion. Gene and Charlie Bodner and I were sitting in the girls' gym at the high school, and up there at the stage, and at the north edge of the stage, I said, look on that wall over there, guys. Do you know what that is on the wall? They said, yeah, that's Van Sack's piece of tape that we had to jump to. It is still there.
How about some questions? Who's got questions for
together. And I guess they had been asked to go to Sousa's band.
And they also went to the year after the earthquake in San Francisco.
That was my mother's, I should say, Henry Castles.
Yeah, I know. Clarinet player. You have a picture of
And your
it.
dad played the tuba or
Self-taught upright.
Because I've got a picture of both of them.
Like to see it?
Sure.
Did you have their derbies on?
They have their uniforms and they're holding their instruments.
Mark, you have a question?
Do any of you remember any candidates for state or national office that came and spoke at Washington Square to crowds of people who were down there?
Paul Simon.
Simon came here?
Paul Simon, he spent quite a little bit of time in Marshall's, as a matter of fact.
I know he
He was down in southern Illinois, and he taught.
Yes, but you were in Westcott, weren't you?
Hey, answer this call.
Who else? Anybody else remember anyone else?
I think another politician that you all know that probably was at Marshall's was Frankie Johnson.
Still does. I like to tell a story on Gene because I think it helped him have the work that he did. We would walk to the band concert uptown. He would pick up a stick on the way, and then he'd stand up on the coping and direct the band.
Anybody else have questions? Yeah.
Not a question, but he wanted to know if any other politician came here. Yeah, good old Secretary of State Powell came here. And he spoke at the Washington Heart the meeting, when they give out the Washingtonian Award. It just so happened to be the night that Carol's dad got it. But anyway, John Bierce was so impressed with Mr. Powell that he said that even though John was a Republican and Powell was a Democrat, that he was going to put a Powell sign up in the front of the dealership. But before the next election, that's when they found out about the shoeboxes.
That's why he came to Washington. He visited J.J. Ring.
Who else? Yeah.
Okay, sure, you could tell us a little bit about this Mary that canvases neighborhood.
About all I could remember, well, my daughters would always play with this. I always thought imaginary friend. And when we went to visit my father down in Tennessee, it was my daughters and me and my father, Alvin, sitting at the table, and they pretty much said, "Aren't you going to say hi to Mary? She came down with us." And Dad goes, "Oh, you know Mary?" And says Dad lived in the Burkett house over on Booth Road. I think Dad probably knew Mary from back then. And the other instance is when my father was building the house, my three stepbrothers, my youngest Ronnie, who passed away, would always talk about Mary being in the basement. And when Dad was building the house, didn't have the backs on the steps. Well, Mary was down in the area underneath the steps, and is all he could do to get up the steps without Mary getting him. But going out and helping pick up brush, Mrs. Essick was talking about having a friend down from Wisconsin who stayed out in the front room of her house, and talking about a lady that stood by the window all night long, and they weren't quite sure who it was, but all he could say was her name began with M. And while we're picking up brush, I go, "Oh, you mean Mary Burkett?" And everybody's looking at me like, okay.
I wanted to
Where was the Burkett House on Beach Road?
Okay, Peters has just built a house.
Who's Peters?
Yes?
You gotta get a little more specific than
I
that.
don't know where that is,
It was a little bit closer to the road
but in that spot?
in that spot,
Okay, I
yeah.
remember
My
that.
my uncle farmed the Burkett farm for quite,
I'm a Burkett, and I don't know where you are. What are you talking about?
on Guth Road.
Where's Goose Road?
First road, towards Moore.
Yeah.
And which way are you going? That way or that way? You're going east.
Yeah.
How far?
A little less than a half mile, about a half mile, before
What
Knoxville Road.
Burkett is it?
I'm not,
Because the Burketts lived out here on,
Jefferson.
yeah, Jefferson and everything like that. I don't know what Burkett this is.
the,
Yeah, you got it.
yeah,
Because I don't remember. Of course, there was two Burketts, two different ways of spelling, and this must have been the other one.
yeah.
Okay, well,
But my uncle farmed the Burkett farm and would always talk to, she lived on, the lady my uncle talked to lived on Holland.
Do you have another question?
I haven't been around lately.
I just wanted to say that when I was in 8th grade and a freshman in high school, I worked in Paul's Market, and I worked in the meat department for Pat Hennessy.
Yeah.
And at that time, the meat department was a complete separate thing from the grocery department. We had our own cash register back there and everything. But that was a great place to work as a kid, because there was always horseplay going on. I mean, your husband was really a joker. And some of the stuff that Pat and him pulled on me as a kid was just, they had me in stitches all the time. That was a good experience for me growing up. And then Bernice, every year at Christmas, had a great big feed, and we all went down to your house. I remember that. Look forward to it every year.
Lot went on there.
Yeah, it did.
Also, you should tell what you did for the Methodist Church Youth Group.
What?
You should tell what you did for the Methodist Church Youth Group.
I should say.
In Washington, you were a real instrumental part, and that's why I came to the Methodist Church in high school, because of all your good work.
Oh, I did enjoy my work at the church. I'm still giving a meal out there. I do remember two young men coming to my door one night, and they came to see if I couldn't do something for the youth in Washington. Because there's nothing to do. They said, can't you just think of something we can do? And I said, well, what are you talking about? Well, getting together some night or something, just having, I said, well, if you go to one of the pastors, and he said that he will back me and maybe see if the ministerial association, well, I'll see what I can do. They were back within, I know, 10 minutes, maybe not that long. But then we started dances at the city building. If you knew where the old city building was, we'd have dances there every Friday night.
Another question? Yes.
I was a transfer to this area in about 1961, I think, or 62. And where I grew up in southern Illinois, they used to have free shows on the main street in this little town. Did Washington ever do that? Sure.
Yeah, in the city building. Yeah, we
Show on
kids
the side of the
are.
building in the southeast corner.
Sunland did too, you remember out on White Swan? Every Friday night was a driving movie type thing.
Remember Snaky Moonshine? Snaky Moonshine was an extra cop, and somebody put a cow in the city building.
Red, is that what you mean?
Pardon?
Red moonshine?
I don't know.
Red moonshine, is that what you mean?
Well, he was a competitor to his dad, don't you remember? He hung wallpaper and was a painter. And he lived on South Main Street, and he liked snakes, and he kept them in his basement. And we called him Snaky Blumenthal, and he was an extra cop. He'd always, you know, on holidays and everything, he took over so the regular cops could stay home. And somebody stuck a cow in the city building, and just as he was going by, he sticks his head out.
Anyone else have any specific questions?
You know, well, probably, yeah, probably.
At Washington, yeah, what years from what
But
to what?
does anybody want to share either, well, coach, like when you were coach here, or anybody want to tell us what year you graduated from high school? Anything, coach? What years were you here?
I was here 51, I believe, right, Bill, to 66. 51 to 66. And I might want to add, I don't want to leave the wrong impression when I said I took a cut to come to Washington. As all of you know, I had 15 great years at Washington that has been a great part of my life.
I got one more to tell about Coach Van Syke. I was a freshman in high school, and my dad wanted me to play basketball in the worst way, and I was a very good basketball player. I played football, but I wasn't a very good basketball player. So I went out freshman year, and I was working part-time in the meat market, trying to do basketball practice too. And the sophomore year, we got started on basketball practice again. And one night I went to Dick after practice, and I said, you know, I said, am I going to sit on the bench all year, or am I going to get to play? And he said, well, why do you ask that? And I said, well, I've got a job working in a meat market, and I said, it's just too much to handle with studies. He said, I think you'd make a lot better butcher if you were.
Would anyone else like to share when they graduated from high school?
Samson was here too.
Well, you graduated before I did. They're older than I am.
I got out 39.
39.
I
We
got
had 39 in the class, graduated in 39, class of 40, at 49.
There you go. Lois, what was yours?
I graduated in 41.
41. Bernice?
The war year.
What years were you in school, Bernice?
No, I didn't.
You didn't finish. When were you in school in Washington?
What?
You went through what grade in Washington?
What grade?
How-
You didn't go to school here, did you?
No, I went to Cooper Station.
Okay.
Drinking.
Remember Ethel?
Anybody else?
Ethel Cooper?
I graduated in 1960.
Tom? Are you sharing?
I was released in 56.
Good. Well, if nobody else has any other specific questions, I want to say thank you very much. Please enjoy your refreshments.